Welcome to episode 2 of the Flood Escape series. One thing I want to get done, or two things I want to get done, is the water script, migrating it to a module script, and adding functionality for the buttons. So first off with the water script, you can go to workspace, go to your water, add a new configuration, name it the settings, add 3 values, int value, we're going to call this intensity, have it set to a value of 1, it's going to be across 1 to 3. For me, you'll see why later. A number value being called speed, how fast up the water is going to go. And I'm going to set this to like a value of 3. And the last one being the C-frame value. This one being called offset. I'm just going to alter its position in the y-axis to about 12 studs. And that should be it. And for some organizations in the workspace, you can add a folder, call it floods, and insert your water in there. So now in server script service, if you go to a core game folder and you can add a module script, call it water setup, replace the variables here, and now we can start scripting. So in here, we're going to add a new table called intensities. This will be equal to a table, the first one. In the table will be called, or its name is going to be water. Its drawn by is going to be, drawn by is going to be 1. And, hold on, quick comma. And its color is going to be equal to a color 3 value. It's color 3. Just click on this little thing here. Set it to whatever color you want. I want that little bluish color. Comma. Paste the script. Change the index of it. Instead of name, just call it acid. Change this drawn by. You can give it a different color. Just a darkish greenish. Now you can copy the script again. I'm only going to have 3 levels. Name being called lava. Drawn by going to be 25. Change the color to red, like a reddish red. So basically what this is it's basically how extreme this water is. 1, just being the basic bluish water, doesn't drown much. 2, being acid, drowns moderately. And the third one being lava, which will basically almost instantly kill you. So now that that's done, we can actually start scripting by adding our first function called water setup dot new. The parameter here being the split part, type annotate it as a part to make things easier for autofilling. And great, the AI just took over. Great. First defined our intensities, or actually our settings, which will be equal to the flood part. Find first child, which is a configuration. And if the settings exist, then we can define our other things like our offset, which will be equal to the settings. Find first child, which is a C-frame value. No, not color correction. C-frame value. And our local speed will be equal to the settings. Find first child, which is a number value. And then our local intensity will be equal to the settings. Find first child, which is a int value. Or actually one last definition, which will be our flood intensity. Spelled that wrong. Which will be equal to the intensities in brackets intensity.value. If the flood intensity exists, then we can continue. Alright. Now we can actually set our values here. So the water, or actually the flood part dot color will be equal to the flood intensity dot color. Our flood part set attribute drawn by, set it to the flood intensity dot drawn by. And that's pretty much it. So now we can add a new function called function water setup dot flood behavior. And you can just copy some scripts as the flood part. I'll copy the script in there and close the statement. You don't need the flood intensity, and that's pretty much all that's left. Now before anything, we can start copying from our water script. Go in here, copy all the way through the definition of players in water, all the way up until the touch ended event. Cut that, and you can paste it in here. Now we have some missing variables that we need to fill in. So you want the run service and the players service, and paste it to the top of here. Replace the water to the flood part. Now that that's done, we have everything's pretty much done, except for this. You can pretty much set this to equal to, and delete the else. Copy the oxygen net value, cut that out, and then oxygen net value will be equal to math.max 0, comma, oxygen net value subtracted by the flood part get attribute drawn by. And extra parentheses because I deleted it. And now it should work, except for we just need to call this function at the end. So drawn players. And now that that's done, we can copy this now. So just copy the script, put it below here. This is going to be outside of the function. And you can cut this code. And you can, and in order for this to work for all floods, we can just call a bindable event whenever the player responds. So on player respond, spelling this wrong, will be equal to the instance.new bindable event, and local on respond will be equal to the on player respond dot event. Now we can just call this function on respond, connect this into a function. The parameter here being a player. Paste the script in, and whenever this happens, we can just fire the bindable event. So on player respond, fire with the player parameter. We're almost done here, so go back into the water script, cut this, or just copy this, go back to our water setup, add a new function called function flood. This will only have one parameter being called the flood part, type annotated as a part. Paste this in here, delete some unnecessary lines, copy some scripts, copy some lines actually, paste it in here, and now we can actually start scripting. You can add an end statement to close this function, cut this, and repaste it back in so everything looks nice. Our new save frame variable will replace the water with the flood part. Instead of times cframes.new, this will be equal to the offset.value. Instead of water.position, it's going to be now flood part.position. Replace these variables down here. And instead of relative speed being over here, or distance, we can just replace these. Delete the speed variable since we don't need these, and paste it in here. Instead of speed, we have it as speed.value. And now this should work. And something else we need to do is close this connection whenever it's done. So this will be equal to nil. But then it will be equal to the run service connection. After this, we can do a if statement. So if the alpha is greater than or equal to 1, then we can close this connection. So connection, disconnect. And we can just call this function right before the drawn players. Have the flood part in the parameters. And now in here, we can do the flood setup. So, or actually not flood setup, it's water setup dot flood behavior, insert the flood part as a parameter, and that should be good to go. The other thing is the changing of values. So what if you wanted to change the intensity to a higher intensity, set the speed to faster, or just in general change the destination? So for that, we can add a tween service. We can define our tween service equals game get service tween service. This is just for visual effects, and our local tween info will be equal to, or actually lowercase tween info will be equal to tween info dot new 1 enum dot easing style dot linear enum dot easing direction dot in, and that's pretty much it for the tween info. Down in here, we can add a new function called water setup dot change behavior or change property. I hate this AI. Flood part being the first parameter called a part. Our property, the property we're changing will be a string, and our value is just any. Now that that's done, we can actually change, just yet again copy this code in the statement, and instead of this being that, just cut off this. Our local property will be equal to the settings find first child property, the property string. If the property exists, then, or that's the lowercase property, property.value will be equal to the value. However, if this property.name equals the intensity, then we can change the color and stuff. So you can just copy the flood intensity, just copy that. Instead of intensity dot, you just replace it with the property. And instead of flood color equals flood intensity color, just cut this. And our local color tween will be equal to a tween service create with our instance being the flood part, our tween info being the tween info we defined earlier, the property table being the color, and it'll be equal to the flood intensity color. Now that that's done, we can play this color tween. So color tween, play. And now this should all work. We no longer need the water script, so you can delete that. Go into the on-player added script, and we can define or require this. So our water setup will be equal to the require script.parent.water setup. And to define our floods folder, so local floods folder equals workspace find first child floods. Now that that's done, our local flood part will be equal to the floods folder dot water1. Now we can call the water setup dot new our flood part. That's pretty much it. No, I'm pretty sure. No, I didn't forget anything. Didn't forget to call any functions, hopefully. Tasks wait. This is just for example, but let's see if the property changing works. So change property, this flood part, our property being the intensity, and we'll just change it to 2. Now if we test this out, hopefully it should work. It's going up, it's joining us, and after 3 seconds it should go green. Doesn't seem to be working. Let's see what went wrong. Same flood part, the intensity, or did I spell it wrong? Flood behavior. Oh wait, intensity. Oh, that's what went wrong. Oh wait, no, that's the other. I'm not really sure what went wrong. Oh, I called this twice. I didn't need to do that. Was that the issue? Let's test it. So after 3 seconds, it's not working. Let's try to debug this. Print changed. So property being intensity, value changing it to 2. It should work, but it isn't for some reason. Everything looks fine, I don't know why. It doesn't seem like it's actually drowning my 3. Change property, I called it, and it should work, but it isn't. So let's print to see if this is working. Oh wait, oh, okay. So what we're not doing is we're not. Okay, so in here you just want to quarantine.wrap our water setup.flood behavior with the flood part parameter. Delete this line of code, and that was our issue. That was yielding the code, I think. There you go, now it works. Now if that's done, you can delete these print statements since we no longer need them. And now we can work on button functionality. I'm going with the basic flood escape little button, red bait or black base with a red top. Name this part into a hitbox. this part is the base. Make sure both of these parts are anchored, group them, name it 1 since it's the first button, add a folder, call it buttons, I misspelled that, buttons. Insert this in here, add another configuration, for this one, let's call it settings yet again. Its configuration is kind of a mouthful. Add two values, one a string value, which we will call objective. This one's objective is to make objects appear, so name it appear. We need an object value, and we'll call it interact. In order for it to interact with something, we need to add a little test example. I'm going to add a little folder here called interactables, which is basically what these buttons are interacting with. Make the things actually look nice. This one to appear, set the transparency to 1, and set its cake light to false. Instead of being called part, just appear to help you differentiate between everything, and set the objective, or actually the interact value, to this. So you can copy this, paste it to the left, change this number to 2, and change the interactable to disappear. These will just be examples, and basically the entire buttons that'll be in the game. This one are interact with the disappear, and the objective is to make the object disappear. Finally, our third button will be called move. This will actually move any objects in the way. So disappear, we'll call it move. I forgot to give them colors, so disappear is red. I forgot to change the properties, and this one too. They shouldn't be invisible. As that's done, we actually need some extra values. And to interact, we need a number value, which is speed. Set it to whatever number, and another one being a C-frame value, which will be its offset. In the position, I'll move it in the y-axis by 12 studs. Now that that's done, you can go into the core game, add another module script, and we can name it to button setup, since this essentially will set up buttons for us. In this module script, we can add a new function called button setup dot initialize. This will initialize all buttons. Initialize. I do not know how to spell. And we need to find a couple of things. The first one being our player service, which will equal to game, get service, players, our run service, game, get service, run service. And finally, actually, do we need any more services? No, I don't think so. But we need to define some couple things, so allow next press. This will basically this will just be another bindable event, so it's that new bindable event, and local on allow next press will just be equal to the allow next press dot event. Now in this function, we can loop through, or actually, instead of that, we just need one more variable, which will be in between this and that, our buttons folder, which will be equal to the workspace dot buttons. And now we can do a little loop. So for I equals 1, comma, number of button folder, get children do, not get tags, get children do, our local button will be equal to the buttons folder, find first child, I. If this button exists, then on allow next press, wait. This is just a basic setup, but now we actually need to add the button functionality. So in here, our local button setup dot on pressed. Just whenever the button gets pressed, it will do something. So button type annotated as a model, and now in here are local settings. I think I have a space there. Yeah, I have a space there. Look to the button, find first child, or find first child, which is a configuration. If these settings exist, then we can define furthermore. In the buttons, we have the settings, the interact objective, so local interact equals settings, find first child, object value, or no, find first child, which is a object value. our local objective will be equal to the settings, find first child, which is a string value. Now that that's done, we can do some things. Oh, we also got to define our hitbox will be equal to the button find first child hitbox. If this hitbox exists, then hitbox dot touched. We're just gonna run this once, or just once into a function. Our parameter here being the other part, and once the button is touched, or actually in the water setup, we can actually copy some code. All we just need is the checking if the player exists code. So if player, then we can fire the allow next press. So allow next press, fire, which will allow the next button to be pressed. In here, we can actually button setup dot on pressed, sending the button parameter. Alright, now that that's done, we can actually do the things that we need to do. So first of all, we need a new table, which will be called objectives. This will hold all functions for the objectives. Our first function being called objectives appear. This needs to be the same, has to be exactly the same as you wrote it in the objective string value. We're gonna need the button model. You can copy this code. If the setting exists, then end the statement. Alright, our local interact object will be equal to the interact.value. If the interact object exists, then we can check if the interact object is a model. So if interact object is a model, then we can loop through all the objects. So for I, comma, object in pairs, interact objects, get children. Why does it keep autofilling as get tags? So we can just set the object.transparency to 1, or actually 0, and we can set its can collide to true. Set this true. Copy this. If it is an interact object, but else, we can just set the interact object by itself. Fortunately, the disappear function is pretty much the same. Make sure you're spelling it right. Instead of setting the transparency to 0, set it to 1, can collide false. 0 to 1, can collide false. And now all we just need is the move function. So objectives.move, we don't need this script except for the interact object. And we can actually copy some code from the water setup, so you can just copy all this code, copy, paste. Not much. Make sure this is defined as the button, the offset, the speed, or we already have the settings defined, so we don't need to check that anymore. Cut this so it snaps into, instead of settings, it is in our interact value, so just in there. Instead of let part, we can add it as object or interact object, and this should work. We should move our interact object, and we can call this function. So objectives brackets objective dot value, with the only parameter being the button parameter or the button model, and this should work. Go into player added, define our button setup. So button setup equal to the require script.parent.button setup, and we can just button setup dot initialize. And one last thing, so this doesn't yield the code, we can just quarantine.wrap this into a function, just so this will allow all the other code to work. So I'm just gonna move this over here so we can test faster. This works, this disappears, and for some reason that just disappears. I think I know what happened, and I forgot to change the objective, so I'm just going to change it and move. That was the only thing I did wrong, and now everything should work. Appear, disappear, move. And now the only thing we need is to change the color. Simple script, go into here. I somehow forgot this, so hitbox.color will be equal to the color tree.new. And color wheel, just change it to a bright green. And that should be it. You can't press any other buttons until the first button is pressed, the second button is pressed, and then the third button is pressed. This all works, and see you in the next episode, which will be hopefully soon.